Well, thank you very much for coming to this. Um, for the people who are going to be viewing this later, could you tell me your name and who you are in the S.C.A.?
All right, my real name is Heinrich Olsgaard, and my name in the S.C.A. began as Heinrich the Dane, because I am originally from Denmark. And then after I was knighted, I adopted the name Heinrich of Hound, which is the ancient name for Copenhagen, where I was born.
Okay. Tell me about your first event. And I believe that we're in for kind of a treat because you were one of the founders, really, of the S.C.A.
Yeah, I was at the very first tournament, May 1st, 1966. And my understanding at the time was that it was a costume party, and if you had swords, bring them, wear them. When I got there, I found out that there was going to be some fighting, and I had some fencing experience in college, so I was happy to participate in that, and got turned on to the concept of fighting, and went from there.
That's awesome. Now, the interesting point for a lot of these questions is they presume the notion that someone has been in the S.A. and it's been an established organization for some time, but I realize that when it comes to you, this is not necessarily the case, because a lot of the things we take for granted as being procedures or policies or corpora, for lack of a better term, were being established as you went through it.
We were inventing it.
So tell me about when they created the Award of Arms, and the first one you remember, or if they gave you one at a certain point, or you got one.
I got one way after I had received other awards. So, in fact, I got 2 awards of arms from 2 different monarchs, and I frankly don't really remember that much about its establishment, other than it was intended to reward people for showing a lot of interest and enthusiasm and participation in the events of the kingdom.
Since that's the case, what was your first award that you did get?
The first award I got was being knighted, and I'm the 2nd knight in the society, so the concept of chivalry and knighthood wasn't really clearly defined. It was a surprise to me, and in fact it occurred moments before I was crowned king for the first time. And the person who knighted me said, no man should be king who is not a knight. And so he knighted me, and then after that he crowned me king.
Okay. Obviously that leads into my next question of tell me about your first crown tourney, and really it's the first crown tourney.
Well, this again is in the ancient times when things were being established. The whole concept of king and crown tournament was new. The first crown tournament, if you want to make it official, was the first tournament by tradition. But the winner of the first tournament wasn't proclaimed king. The winner of the second tournament wasn't proclaimed king. The winner of the third tournament was proclaimed king. However, and that was me, however, I wasn't made king, I wasn't crowned king until the beginning of the fourth tournament. And when I won the third tournament, I received a scroll proclaiming me king, which I still have. And if you want to see what it looks like, go to the West Kingdom history site, and you can find an image of the first scroll that
They put it on the line.
And between the time I won the crown in September, and then there was the first 12th night, and then the fourth tournament was held in March of the following year, '67, which was still AS1. And by that time we had made plans for the coronation. I'd made a crown, and so there was a crown available, and we had the formal coronation ceremony at the beginning of the tournament. And then at the end, the winner was then the king.
Okay. Did you ever run an event from just purely like the way I believe they refer to as Masters of the Pelican do now, service-based, where you didn't participate in the event other than this, you were in charge of it all?
Not tournaments. I did autocrat 9 wars. I autocrated a bunch of equestrian events, equestrian tournaments, and none of them were really competitive, so I participated in all of those events.
What was it like to run the first war that you did?
Well, the first war that ever occurred in the summer, July '67, and I'm not sure if there was any autocrat for it, but I autocrated the following war. And the wars that in those days we had just a handful of people, so and I'm talking about 6 fighters on a side, and in order to try and generate more participants, because the number of fighters was limited to not only what armor we could scrape together, because in the early days there was a lot of sharing of pieces of armor. For those people that didn't have their own armor, they used communal fencing masks or great helms. And so in order to get more people to participate, we introduced archery, war archery, so that women and children could go out and shoot short rubber-tipped or foam-tipped arrows at the fighters, and or act as scouts. And so that allowed the armies to maybe get up to 10 people on the side, half of whom were, scouts or archers. And then gradually the popularity of the wars increased, and so then we got more fighters. And also at the same time, more armor was being made, both for communal use as well as for individuals, so they'd have their own. And the growth of other areas of S.C.A. activities, such as the barony of Atenveldt, also helped contribute to the number of people that participated and had their own armor. Charles of the Jacks with his coat of plates, and various other people. So as time went on, the enrichment of the whole activity occurred by mutual interest, mutual participation, mutual efforts and learning and doing and things like that. So, it was really critical that we had the growth that we had in the locations that we had, and Atenveldt was a major contributor before it became its own kingdom.
So would it be fair to say that your first officer position was actually as king?
Yes.
Tell me about your first reign then.
Well, it was very short. As I said, I was crowned at the beginning of the tournament. At the end of the tournament, the victor, Richard of Montroyal, was then proclaimed king. And then that ended my term of office that time. But I got to preside over the tournament. I was the first person to make chainmail armor. And
that's cool.
So I had a hauberk that I just completed during the winter months, and I didn't get to fight in it, but I got to sit in it and find out that you catch cold wearing chainmail when you're not doing anything in March cold weather. And I got to experience having a processional appear before me and have the people introduced. My queen was absent because she was down here in Arizona and Phoenix helping to build a church, and had already committed for that, and so was unable to attend the tournament. But it was a new experience, but it certainly wasn't as rich as subsequent reigns became, because it was just for one day, and I didn't get to fight, which was one of my major interests.
And you've been king 6 times?
Yes.
Tell me about your most memorable reign.
Oh, that's a hard question to answer. Probably the most memorable one was I had a musician that graced the Royal Pavilion and played on her guitar in the background throughout most of the busy part of the day. And it helped diffuse a lot of the hustle and bustle that was going on in determining the who was to fight who and things like that, which a lot of the list activity I was involved in, because at that time the Crown made the decisions. There wasn't really a list person per se, as I recall, who was able to make those decisions. And then there were people coming to me relatively constantly throughout the event, asking for guidance in one way or another, either scheduling or other matters. And so it was nice to have background music that put a soothing element into the mix. And that I remember.
Since you got to witness the birth of the barony of Atenveldt, what about its investiture being the premier barony of the S.C.A. do you remember?
That is difficult to answer because it was a new thing for me. I came down here with the King and Queen of the West to participate in the tournament, and my focus was mostly on the fighting. And the subsequent times when I came down here, except for when Atenveldt became a kingdom, I came down officially bearing, although the crown already existed down here, the crown that Richard Ironsteed received at his coronation. And I came as representative of the King of the West at the time. And bits and pieces of things that I remember are ceremonies and things like that, but it's more individuals that I sort of remember, but keep in mind this is 45 plus years ago, and it's difficult to remember anything specific.
Okay. So I know that the first coronation you got to attend to was the person who took over for you at the end of that one event. Was there a particular coronation of someone that you liked that stood out in your mind in all the years you served?
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Well, I've always been interested in historical accuracy, and well, there are so many different people. Maybe when Paul and Carol of Bellatrix were crowned, and they were crowned several times. So again, I don't know if I can remember anything specific about a particular coronation, but I did make the crowns for them, and I remember them. I always thought that they were kind of the epitome of kings and queens, at least in the West Kingdom. But there are so many others. One of the things about the West Kingdom is we've always had 3 reigns a year. So we've had many more kings and queens than any of the other kingdoms have in any given span of time.
Okay. Tell me about how you came up with your chosen device, or your heraldry that represents you as opposed to the West specifically.
Well, my heraldry is a green field with a round black circle with a gold horse head and a gold crown. And the crown represents my having reigned as king. And the horse head is because I love horses, and I've always loved horses. In fact, the day that I was crowned king for the first time, a lady was riding through the park and stopped to see what we were doing and inquired what was going on. And I went over and asked her, could I try my new armor on her horse? And she let me. So I got to ride around the list area for a few minutes on her horse. And
that had to be epic.
And there's a photo of that, which was used as a basis for a drawing that Diana Listmaker did for the cover of the TI #1, and that photo was repeated in TI a year or two ago.
Nice. I had seen the photo at one point. I've had most of the TIs, and for the people who are watching who may not be familiar with it, that's Tournaments Illuminated. Out of all, and I realize that this is a vast question because they don't normally expect people to have quite the breadth of experience that you do. Was there any demo at a public event for a school or for some other function that you remember that was meaningful to you?
Well, we've done lots of demos over the years. I remember doing one for Boy Scouts, a local troop. I remember doing several for a grammar school in my shire. And I remember the University of California in Berkeley had a class on the Bayeux Tapestry that I contacted the instructor and got permission to have some S.C.A. people come and give demonstrations and or talks. So we did a fighting demo wearing Norman era armor, and the lady who later became my wife was one of the people demonstrating, just to show that Matilda may or may not have been involved in any martial activity, but it could have been possible. And one of our members who at the time had a Harris's hawk and a kestrel gave a talk about falconry, and another member of our shire gave a talk about embroidery and had a demonstration of the S.C.A. scene that she had embroidered. And I think I enjoyed that series of demos the best because they related specifically to historical context.
That's awesome. What is your favorite Estrella War?
I don't remember the year, but it was one of the last ones at Estrella Mountain Park.
Okay.
And it was the one where there were 3 armies that numbered about 1,100 fighters each. And there was a big hay bale pile, and Ivan Dugray was commander of one of the forces, and I was up in the hay bale pile with him, videotaping a lot of the combat, and just seeing the various armies and groups in each army maneuvering on the battlefield was really impressive. And also, that was the time when it suddenly became apparent to me that free-arm can helms were no longer popular. Instead, bassinets and bark boots and helmets of that nature seem to predominate.
What's a favorite feast you might have enjoyed, either for ambiance or for the food specifically, your company even?
Maybe the private feast that now I have to remember names. One of the better fighters in the West Kingdom, been king at least 3 times, and I will remember his name, but it skates by me now. But he was celebrating, I think, his 40th knighting anniversary, and he gave a private feast, and there were 50 or more of us there. Another one I remember was there was a couple of non-S.C.A individuals in the San Francisco Bay Area who were talking about making a film of Arthurian characters and doing it in Northern California. And I wanted to introduce them to the S.C.A, so I held a feast where about 30 people were present. And I remember that one fondly too, because I did some of the cooking. But we just had a very simple bread, fruit, cheeses, chickens, roast chickens, and a lot of mead that I purchased for the event. And it seemed quite successful. The movie never came to fruition. In fact, one of the individuals ended up being involved in a homicide, and as far as I know, went to prison and still is there.
Wow. Didn't expect the spin for that story.
No.
It does seem like a lot of the people you've met that are special to you in your life happened in the S.C.A. Who was at least 2 of them?
Two of whom?
People you met in your life that, through the S.C.A, that became very special to you.
My wife.
I figured that would be at least one of them.
And it was on a trip to Burro Creek War. She was from the Bay Area, I was from the Bay Area, and we rode together with a mutual friend to the war. And we started dating after we got back.
That's awesome. When did you pop the question to her? Was that an event or something private?
No, that was at home. We moved in together maybe not quite a year after we met, and it was maybe a year after we were living together that we decided to get married.
Okay. And someone else aside from your wife that you met through the S.C.A that's very special to you now?
I'd say probably the late Carol about Bellatrix.
Tell me why.
She was just a fabulous lady. In my mind, she was the epitome of royal queen when she was on the throne. She was very generous. She was very knowledgeable. She was very enthusiastic about anything and everything that had to do with the S.C.A.
And what award have you received that stands out in your mind as being the most special to you?
I think the Order of the Laurel.
How'd that come about?
Well, I've always enjoyed making things, and in fact, the term Society for Creative Anachronism appeals to me primarily in the word creative. I've always liked to make things, partly is because the only way I could afford to get stuff is to make it. And so I began making making my own armor. I made the first helmet in the S.C.A, the first crown, the first chainmail hauberk, first basket hilt, and I made the silver crowns of the Kingdom of the West. And I think in recognition of that activity, among many other things, I was awarded the Order of the Laurel, and I feel that that probably is a fair assessment of my interests, not necessarily my abilities. To me, somebody who is the epitome of an artist is somebody who can come up with their own creations completely on their own. In my case, I try to emulate something that came before, or modify something that exists today to make it function the way I'd like it to function. And I find it difficult to come up with original ideas in terms of design or in terms of appearance. But in terms of function, that's easier for me to do in terms of creating an original. I feel that I'm able to find a need and find a way of fulfilling that need better perhaps than some other people can, but not always.
Well, that was actually the last question. I want to thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful trip here and trip home, and your visit. And it's been quite an inspiration for me to sit with the first king.
Thank you.
So, pleasure.